So anybody who was sleeping is now definitely woken up. 1, 2, 3. If you just can get a little bit lower. Just a little bit lower. Perfect. Yeah, I'm really happy that we have this weekend together. And I think we are going to look at some very important topics, which is going to deal with the meaning of life. I think it's a very relevant topic, and I think that we are going to learn a lot. So, without further ado, I would like to start with a prayer, and then we are going to see where we are going to end up. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this wonderful evening, which we can start together, the Sabbath. And I pray, Lord, that you may come close to us. I pray, Lord, that you may speak to our hearts so that after these meetings, which we will have today and tomorrow, we can have discovered the meaning of life. It's a big thing, but we know that you are a big God. In Jesus' name, Amen. A 27-year-old Indian man plans to sue his parents for giving birth to him without his consent. This was the headline of a 2019 BBC article where Raphael Samuel believes it is wrong to bring children into the world because all that awaits them is a lifetime of suffering and misery. So when asked about her son's decision to sue them, his mother responded in the article, "I must admire my son's courage to take his parents to court, knowing that we are both lawyers. If Raphael can provide a rational explanation of how we could have sought to consent to his being born, I will accept my fault." Now, the whole situation is humorous. I think you can see that, but this is a real story. The idea of obtaining consent before birth is physically impossible and absurd if you think about it. But doesn't this 27-year-old guy make a valid point? To be born is not a choice. We do not get to choose where we are born, who our parents will be, when we are going to be born, or in what area of the world we will be born in, or which history of humanity we will come into. Now, I did not decide to have a large nose, and I did not decide if I'm going to be short or if I'm going to be long. I did not decide any of that. These are things that I just inherited. But you see, Raphael's idea is much deeper than that. Because millions of people today around the world experience a reality that can be described as meaninglessness. Have you heard of that term before? Meaninglessness? The question is life worth living? And so if life is not worth living, then why have children? If life is really about working and paying rent, suffering and then dying, what is the point of life? So for this reason, I have entitled this first presentation, as you can see on the screen, "Is there life when? Before death?" Usually this question is asked in the context of, is there life after death? But I'm playing with words here because we want to know, not that if there is life after that, that's important, but is there life before death? Can we truly experience the good life already here and now? You know, there was William Shakespeare who once said, you have heard it, to be or not to be? That is the question. And I have concluded personally that there are basically two perspectives in which you can live life according to. I think I'm going to need your help, Henry. Next point, as you can see there, exactly. You can see life according to these two perspectives. Life is either going to be meaningful or life is going to be meaningless. And these are the two ways in which you will start. And depending on where you start, it's going to impact you. It's going to give you different answers and explanations. Today, we live here in Europe in what I would call a meaning crisis. There's a meaning crisis taking place all over society, and especially young people today. If you would ask young people, what is the meaning of life? They would be like, and then they would go on. There is a meaning crisis in Europe where young people especially have a chronic lack of meaning and purpose in their lives. The question is, how did this come about? This didn't come up overnight. This is something that has happened since the last 100 and 150 years of different ideas that has come to fruition. And if you really want to understand why people behave the way they do and why they think the way they think, next slide, you have to understand this man. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. You like his mustache? I don't. My wife said, if you would have a mustache like that, But if you want to understand society today, you have to understand this man, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was living in the middle of the 1800s, and he was a German philosopher, and he's best known for the phrase, God is dead. Have you heard of that phrase before? God is dead. Now, what did he mean by that? Now, he didn't mean that God does not exist, because he didn't believe in God's existence. What he believed with this phrase, God is dead, is that people's belief in God has collapsed in Europe. So what that means is, because people in our societies do not believe in God anymore, that is going to have consequences. And Nietzsche argued that this is going to be a bad thing. Nietzsche didn't celebrate, oh, God is dead, let's have a party. No. It wasn't a joyful message. It was a catastrophic one, because he believed that if God is dead, the next century is going to be the bloodiest century in Europe. And oh, how right he was, because we have the 2 world wars, which actually more people died in the last century than all the centuries combined before. And he argued that the God is dead idea is going to usher in what he called the advent of nihilism. Now, what is nihilism? Nihilism, according to Nietzsche, is the highest values, they lose their value, and the goal is missing. Why? Finds no answer. In other words, nihilism is meaninglessness, total, complete meaninglessness, where why exist if there is no goal or meaning in life? Now, you can understand there is a meaning crisis which goes back to the idea that God is dead, and therefore people say life is meaningless. There is no ultimate beginning to life, there is no ultimate goal to life, and here, 60, 70, 80 years is going to be about nothing. Nothing started it, we are going to nowhere, and this one, it's completely nothing. And I'm going to show you in this presentation that it is absolutely impossible to live that life is meaningless. It is absolutely impossible to live as if life would be meaningless, because every action that you have, every hope, every love, all point to a deep belief that life matters profoundly. Even denying meaning reveals that you are longing for meaning. So here we have a society where we are flirting with meaninglessness, and it is going to absolute shattering. So for instance, when you look at the movies and the Hollywood blockbuster movies that are being presented, this is the idea of meaninglessness that is presenting to us. For instance, we have the character Joker in Batman. Joker is a completely nihilistic individual who thinks that life is completely meaningless, and whatever he does, it will have no point. There is no goal to it. The idea of meaninglessness comes up over and over and over in the movies in which we are watching. And another such expression, if we can go to the next one, comes from Woody Allen. Now, probably you are too young to know who Woody Allen is, but he was one of the biggest actors, at least in the last century. But he wasn't just an actor. He was a director. He was a writer. He was the one that was playing in the movies which he was directing and he was writing the plotline for. And in many of his movies, he is basically showing how meaningless life is. Okay? And this is how the movie Annie Hall begins. Like literally, this is how the movie begins. And notice what he's going to say. If we just can press next.
There's an old joke. Two elderly women are at a Catskill Mountain resort, and one of them says, "Boy, the food at this place is really terrible." The other one says, "Yeah, I know, and such small portions." Well, that's essentially how I feel about life, full of loneliness and misery and suffering and unhappiness, and it's all over much too quickly. And examining my life and trying to figure out where did the screw up come, you know? And a year ago we were in love, you know, and I just, and it's funny, I'm not a morose type. I'm not a depressive character. You know, I was a reasonably happy kid, I guess. I was Brooklyn during World War II.
He's been depressed. All of a sudden, he can't do anything.
Why are you depressed, Alvy?
Tell Dr. Flicker. It's something he read.
Something you read, huh?
The universe is expanding.
The universe is expanding?
Well, the universe is everything, and if it's expanding, someday it will break apart, and that will be the end of everything.
What is that your business? He stopped doing his homework.
What's the point?
What has the universe got to do with it? You're here in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not expanding.
It won't be expanding for billions of years yet, Alvy. And we've got to try and enjoy ourselves while we're here, huh?
This is a brilliant play. Here you have the mother who has, if we can just turn it out a little bit, here we have a mother who has absolutely no clue about the big questions of life. This little guy, he has come to understand that if life and universe is eventually going to implode and there is no goal and everything is going to end, then what's the point of life? So he says, what is the point of even making my homework? Now, if you believe that life is meaningful, you better do your homework. So that's not going to be the conclusion of this presentation. But do you understand? If life is meaningless, why even exist? Why even do your homework? Why even come out of bed? And here you have the doctor and the psychiatrist who is trying to give him some sort of an explanation and an answer, is that, well, you know what? The universe is going to explode in billions and billions of years, so let's enjoy life. But what is it to enjoy? If there is no meaning, if there is no purpose, and if there is nothing to make it in life. You know, a famous writer called Leo Tolstoy, he was grappling with the meaninglessness of life. And this is how he wrote it in his very famous book, A Confession. This is how he writes. My question, that which at the age of 50 brought me to the verge of suicide, was the simplest of questions lying in the soul of every man, a question without an answer to which one cannot live. What was it? It was, what shall come of what I am doing today, or what shall do tomorrow? What will come of my whole life? Differently expressed, the question is, why should I live? Why wish for anything? Why do anything? It can also be expressed thus, is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy? Now you are thinking to yourself, oh boy, that was a depressing old guy. But still, you have not refuted his logic. You may say that, oh, this guy, he's too depressing, he's thinking too negatively, but you have not said anything about the logical way he has come to the conclusion. If life is meaningless, and the only thing awaiting us is death, why even live? That's why I'm asking you, is there life before what? Before death. What happens if God does not exist? We have seen life becomes meaningless. But it is impossible to live life as though it were meaningless. And so to address this crisis in the mid-20th century in Europe, French philosophers are coming out trying to answer the question of life's meaninglessness in the context of God is dead. So you have two people there. You have Albert Camus on the one side and Jean-Paul Sartre on the other, and they are proposing a solution to the meaninglessness in society, and they are saying that yes, life is meaningless universally and objectively, but you know what? The solution to it is that we create our own meaning. We create our own meaning, which means is that yes, life is meaningless, but we have to create it. And you know, Camus, he believed that the most critical and most important philosophical question that could be asked, listen to what it was. The most important philosophical question to be answered is, should one commit suicide or not, given that life is inherently meaningless? I want to say again. Should one commit suicide or not, given that life is inherently meaningless? What would you answer? Do you see at least the logical conclusions that they are coming to? If God is dead, life is meaningless, and eventually, does it really depend how you live your life today? It doesn't. It doesn't matter at all whether you come out of the bed or you stay in bed. And they are saying that the only solution that we are going to give is that you're going to create your own meaning. And you know, first, this sounds, very good, This sounds like I have a lot of freedom to decide for myself. It gives you the illusion of freedom. And it gives you the illusion of that you have control over your life. And today, this is the narrative in society today. That you must not discover the meaning of life, you must create the meaning of life. You see that in the movies, you hear that in the music songs that you have, and this sounds appealing to people, but I want to spend time with you in the rest of this presentation is, what are the consequences if we as a society start to live as though we can create our own meaning? And I'm going to demonstrate to you very easily, I hope, is that the solution to create your own meaning leads actually to even greater problems when you consider the implications. What are the implications if we as a society believe that we are to create meaning and not to discover the meaning of life? If we can go to the next slide. This is the starting point in which you as a young person, you have to decide which of them are true. You see, if God exists, it automatically means that God, who has a purposeful beginning to life, is also going to have life is going to be meaningful. And because life is meaningful in its objective sense, you can discover that meaning, and you also have the freedom, of course, that it is going to be tailor-made to you. But if God is dead, in other words, God doesn't exist, life is completely meaningless. And so it is up to the individual to create their own meaning. And so what I'm going to do in this presentation is that we are going to compare these last 2 points. What is better? Is it better to create your meaning? Or is it better to discover that there is an universal meaning to life? And I'm going to show you the implications and the negative consequences if you say that it is to create the meaning. I'm going to present to you 6 points, and I think that is going to be really relevant. Next slide. Now, point number 1 is that and think through. If life is meaningless, then life itself is also worthless. Think it through. If life is meaningless, then life itself is also what? Worthless. Are you worthless? I hope not. But you believe in your self-worth because you are thinking that God exists and life is meaningful. You see, at the individual level, this creates the issue. If you are personally responsible to create your meaning, you are also personally responsible to create your own self-worth. And this is, I believe, why young people today are having so much problem with their self-image. Why they have so much problem with their, depression and anxiety and mental health we have is because we are thinking that I am to create my self-image, but within the Christian story, you are fully valued. You cannot add any more value to what you have received. At the end of this presentation, I want you to ask, if both of them are equally true, which one would you want to believe in? Think it through. If life is truly meaningless, life becomes fundamentally worthless. Imagine a painter. Can you see the painter? Imagine a painter, Picasso or whoever. Picasso is working tirelessly on a masterpiece. He's pouring his heart and soul into every brush stroke, only to find that the canvas disintegrates before anyone sees it. The effort, the beauty, the purpose, all gone, reduced to nothing. Without meaning, life feels the same way. Our relationships, our achievements, and our sacrifices, they lose their weight because there is no enduring framework to give them value. And it's not just that life becomes shallow and hollow, it's that the very things we cherish and strive to become, they actually become insignificant. So my friends, this is the point number one. If life is meaningless, then life is also worthless. But within the Christian story, we believe that there is a God who has created every single individual in the image of God, which means that every single individual has a worth that you cannot add to or reduce that. And our societies, especially in Europe, they are built upon the idea that every single person has human dignity. Where did that come from? It didn't come from the idea that God is dead, definitely. It came from the Christian understanding of how human beings are created. There is a life that is to be discovered, and life itself is full of value. Let's go to point number 2. Point number 2 is, not all created meanings in life are equally meaningful or equally valuable. That's what society is trying to teach us. That I can create my own meaning, and you can create your own meaning, and that person can create their own meaning, and you don't have the right to tell anybody else about what somebody else's meaning. And so that means that your meaning is equally valid as my meaning of life, and the third person's and the fourth person's, and so on. But think it through. If someone claims that their life's meaning is to get drunk every day and indulge like drugs and cocaine and all those of things, that person is going to say, this is my meaning of life. And nobody in society can say that, you know what, that's not a meaningful way to say. But the way society thinks is that, well, if you want to have your meaning of life, like get high or get drunk and all of that, and somebody says, I want to live a sober life, within this understanding, because meaning is created and it's not discovered, it means that both of their lives are going to be what? Equally meaningful and equally valuable. But let's take this illustration a little bit further on so that you understand what I'm talking about. Suppose that Adolf Hitler, you know who Adolf Hitler is? Suppose that Adolf Hitler, the Nazi dictator, He declares that my meaning in life is to exterminate all Jews, all Romani people, all Africans, all homosexuals from the face of the earth. That's his meaning of life. Are you going to say anything about it? I'm waiting. But that's his created meaning. Now you see, what we have to understand is that the moment we claim that life purposes such as Adolf Hitler's, they are not meaningful, my question back to you is, on what moral ground do you make that claim? You see, the French philosophers, they were saying that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. I want to say that again. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. Why? Because there is no moral values that can tell us what is right and what is wrong. So of course, Adolf Hitler's meaning of life is not going to be equally meaningful and equally valuable to somebody else who wants to help people. Are you with me? We are putting ourselves into a trap as a society where we don't know how to answer things. Point number 3. You see, if you want to create your own meaning in an otherwise meaningless universe, life is going to be absurd and is going to lead to despair. You know what this absurd means? Absurd means that it doesn't make any sense. That's what absurd means. Absurd means that it is completely crazy. That's what it means. And the thing is that when life doesn't make sense, it becomes absurd. But making sense of life is essential to us. You have to make sense of things in order to have this to work in a normal fashion. I could give you many different examples here. I'm just jumping here in next slide. This philosopher is called Thomas Nagel. And he delves into the implications whether, if life is meaningless, life is eventually going to be absurd. He actually agrees that if God is dead and life is meaningless, life itself becomes absurd. Next point. In this context, he argues, and this is really fascinating, he says, listen very carefully, created meanings are less rational than discovered meanings. You heard that right. Less rational. You know what the word rational means? To use this. Created meanings are less rational than discovered meanings. What does he mean by that? He basically says, next step, he says if God does not exist and you write, let's say, a great work of literature that continues to be read thousands of years from now, and nevertheless eventually the solar system will cool or the universe will wind down and collapse, and all trace of your effort will vanish, if you think about the whole thing, it wouldn't matter if you had never existed. Now, I know that this seems like I'm throwing you cold water, but these are the implications if you believe that meaning can be created. It doesn't matter if you exist. That's the God is dead idea and implications. And he is actually right. What does it matter whether you have done something or anything in life if the universe will eventually disappear? Remember Woody Allen's sketch? What's the point of doing the homework? What's the point of waking up and coming out of bed if the universe eventually is going to be destroyed? Nothing, because everything will be obliterated. So, why try to live a good life if justice will not be ultimately served? But deep down, you know it is important to live a good life. Is there a difference between Hitler and Mother Teresa? Of course there is. But if the universe is going to implode and God is dead, in this mindset there is absolutely no difference between Hitler and Mother Teresa. So what is the solution to life's meaninglessness, he says? Before we go there, Remember when he said that created meaning is less rational than discovered meaning? What does he mean by that? This is fascinating. If there is anything I want you to take from this presentation, this is going to be the point. This means that if you are an atheist and you use your brain and your reasoning to live the life according to your worldview, the less meaning you are going to find. I'm going to say that again. Let me say it an opposite way. The less an atheist uses the brain and his reasoning to live life according to the worldview of meaninglessness, the greater meaning they are going to find. So the less they are using their brain, the bigger meaning that they are going to find. But the opposite is true also. The more an atheist uses his brain and his reasoning to live life based on the atheistic worldview, the less meaning they are going to find. Why? Because life is meaningless. And the more you think about the meaninglessness of life, the less meaning you are going to find. You know how it is in the Christian story? Because we believe that life is meaningful, the more you use your brain, the more meaning you are going to find in life. Once again, what are you going to choose? Let's go to the next point quickly. Point number 4. What is the solution to the meaninglessness and absurdity? Life is absurd from an atheistic perspective. Thomas Nagel's solution is as hopeless as the problem itself. What's his solution? Point number 4. If we can go to point number 4. He says that life's absurdity is to be solved with life's irony. Do you know what he means by that? He says that instead of feeling despair because life is absurd, he suggests that we should face life's meaninglessness with humor. We should face life's meaninglessness with acceptance. You see, the problem is that this is not only insufficient, but it can easily lead people to become cynical, bitter, and resentful. Let me give you 2 illustrations, but the 2 illustrations are actually one and the same. Imagine that there is Anna. What's her name? What's her name? Anna. So imagine that there is Anna. She's a 25-year-old woman, and her husband had recently died of cancer. She now needs to take care of her newborn child, who is just a couple of months old. She has also lost her job about a month or so later after her husband's death. They live in an apartment, but she doesn't know how they are going to pay the rent or get food on the table. This is Anna's situation. Who is it? This is Anna. Now let's say that you meet her. Do you think that she is crushed? Husband has died of cancer. She has a newborn child. She doesn't know how to pay the rent. She doesn't know how she's going to get food on the table. She is crushed. Now let's say that you meet her at Fika Place and you listen to her story. She tells her story and she's completely desperate, and question is, how are you going to try to comfort her? What are you going to say? Well, if life absurdity is to be solved with life's irony, as Thomas Nagel says, you will say something like this: Anna, the solution to your problem is to simply accept the irony of life. Yes, your situation is absurd, but you have to face it with humor. Put on Netflix. Watch a stand-up comedian. Don't take life seriously. You have to laugh at your situation that your husband has died. You have to laugh at the situation that you are now all alone and just move on. If you would be in whose situation? What's her name? Anna. If you would be in Anna's situation, what would you respond? You would probably not respond. You would give him a slap in the face. And then you would say, well, no matter how much I try to laugh at my situation, I still feel hopeless. I don't feel any relief. As a matter of fact, I am doing even worse. I don't see any forward way, and above all, I feel like you have dismissed me and you have made light of my struggle and my pain. Is the irony of life really the solution to the meaninglessness of life? Do you see how empty the atheistic story is? If God is dead, life is meaningless, and the way to solve the meaninglessness is to laugh? Let me give you another story, because this is a continuation of the story. Let's go to the husband who had died. This is a real story. His name was, if you can put the screen, his name was Paul Kalinthi. There they are. Do you see the wife? That's Anna. Do you see the child? And there is Paul Kalinthi. You know who Paul Kalinthi was? He was a brilliant neurosurgeon. A neurosurgeon is someone who is working with the brain. And he had his life ahead of him, but suddenly he was confronted with the brutal reality of death when he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer at the age of 36. Everything he had worked for, the long education, the late nights at the hospital, the dream of becoming a leading surgeon, suddenly feels meaningless, doesn't it? He described his struggle with cancer in his book. He wrote a memoir, and this is what we can find. His book called is When Breath Becomes Air, and in the book he describes the feeling as falling through life without finding anything to hold on to. His future, once filled with goals and ambition, shrinks to mere days and hours. He had grown up as a Christian, but became a militant atheist who enjoyed being rational and scientific. But now when life's absurdity is hitting him, he has no answer to his heartbreaking question, why? And so Kalinthi is basically asking the main question, next slide, and the question is, what makes a life worth living even when the future is gone? Do you know the answer to that question? Do you know the answer to the question of what makes life worth living? As I asked and said before, what is it that makes you come out of bed? What is it that makes you want to live? What is it that drives you? What is it that gives you purpose? What is the goal that you have before you? The answer to that question is going to decide the meaningfulness of your life. And that's why we have these three presentations. How can you find true meaning in life? But once again, if life is meaningless, why fight? If life is meaningless, why try? If life is meaningless, it will all end anyway. Remember Camus? The biggest philosophical question that we can answer is, should we commit suicide or not, in the context of whether life is meaningless? So what did Paul Kalinthi do to find hope? I'm going to tell you that after the presentation as we come to the end of it. So please pay attention, because we're going to come to Paul. Yes, he died, but he found hope. How did he find hope? Next one. Anybody knows who that man is? Steve Jobs. Many of you probably has his phone in your hands now. But Steve Jobs, he died also of cancer. And when you get into that situation, you are reevaluating everything in your life. And this is what he said. It is strange to think that you accumulate all this experience and it just goes away. So I really want to believe that something survives, that maybe your consciousness endures. Nobody just wants to disappear. Everybody wants to continue on, and especially when you are at your deathbed, you are reevaluating what is that is worth to live. We have 2 more points and then we are done. 5th point. What have we discovered so far? Let's go through them quickly. We discovered that if life is meaningless, then life is also what? Worthless. Not all created meanings in life are equally meaningful and equally valuable. Remember the example I gave you? The example was from Hitler. If he says, this is my created meaning, are we just going to accept it? Of course not. Number 3, creating your own meaning in an otherwise meaningless universe is absurd and it leads to despair. Number 4, life's absurdity is to be solved with life's irony. I just gave you illustrations about it. And point number 5, creating your own meaning in life in an otherwise meaningless universe is more or less pretending. Pretending. That's what it is. Life is actually meaningless, but you are saying, I still have meaning in life. No, you don't. You just pretend. You just pretend that you have meaning in life, but it is actually meaningless from an atheistic perspective. Why? If God is dead, life is meaningless. If we have the next slide, this is a scientist who is speaking. And you know, there are many good scientists, but there are also many scientists who are bad philosophers. And just because you hear scientist, don't just fall around. Think. Listen to what he says. He says in his book, The Big Picture, on the origin of life, meaning, and the universe itself. He says, maybe we are fooling ourselves if thinking we can find fulfillment once we accept that we are part of the physical world, patterns of elementary particles beholden to the laws of physics. Sure, you can say you are leading a rich and rewarding life based on your love for your family and friends, your dedication to your craft, and your work to make the world a better place. But notice his question. But are you really? Do you really live a meaningful life? If the value we place in such things isn't, what is the word? Isn't objectively determined. You know what that means? You have objective reality, which is the true, and then you have the subjective thing, which can be either or. In other words, he says that if these things, meaning, purpose, and these things, if they are not objectively true, let's continue. And if you won't be around to witness any of it in 100 years or so, how can you say your life truly matters? This is such a cutting-edge question that we as a society has to answer. And you know what his answer is? His answer is, this is just grumpiness talking. This is just grumpiness talking. Just stop. Stop with the questions. Stop with the questions. Remember, don't use your brain. Because if an atheist uses his brain and his reasoning more, he's going to find less meaning in life. In other words, don't use your brain. This is just grumpiness talking. Just shut up. We don't ask those questions here. You know how many times I have been said as a Christian, I became a Christian in Sweden. And you know how many times my classmates said, Sebastian, you don't use your brain because you have become a Christian? And the atheist is doing the same thing. The atheist cannot use his brain and his reasoning to its logical conclusion because he will realize that life is eventually meaningless. But instead, we should pretend. Pretend as though life has meaning. Let me read another quote. This is a longer quote. The article is entitled, I asked atheists how they find meaning in a purposeless universe. Very good question. It says, yes, of course, says the writer, I know that life is ultimately without meaning or purpose, but notice the next word. The what? The trick is not to wake up every morning and feel that way. Do you understand what is happening? Life is, in its universal sense, meaningless. But if you keep thinking about the meaninglessness of life, once again, what's the point? The trick is to pretend. The trick is to lie to yourself. The trick is to deceive yourself that actually my created meaning gives me meaning. This atheist says, not going to buy it. The trick cognitive dissonance? Embrace it. Create a sense of meaning and purpose by doing something useful with your life, by being creative. I don't mean that in a Ponzi hipster way. I mean make a curry, build some bookshelves, write a poem, and most importantly, find people you like and love and spend lots of time with them. I regularly have people over for dinner, throw parties for no other reason than I just want to spend time surrounded by the people I love. And if you're really stuck, eat rice and dal. Physically, filling yourself with the food you love really does fill, what is the word? Emptiness you may feel inside. Wow. But can you really feel the emptiness inside with physical things? Is it really the quantity of dal and rice that is really going to give you the meaning of life? Of course not. Tomorrow I'm going to give you a last presentation. It's called The Search for Happiness. We're going to study happiness and how you can live a happy life. But once again, it's about pretending. It's about lying to yourself. It's about deceiving yourself into thinking in this way. You know, I've been told when I became a Christian that I don't use my brain, as I told you, because I have chosen to believe in God. But here they are saying, don't use your brain. The trick is, if you're an atheist, don't think, don't ask these questions that would otherwise shatter the atheistic worldview. The trick is not to wake up and think about it. Don't think about it. If atheism is that strong, I think it should be thought about it. Well, once again, there is an emptiness in the people's lives. And you know, even if you may fill that emptiness with physical things, eventually the emptiness will return, trust me. And the emptiness is then going to be even stronger and even bigger than the one it was before it. So what do you do then? Are you going to eat more rice and dal? Are you going to do more of these physical things? We are spiritual beings according to the Bible, which means that our deepest desires are actually spiritual and not physical. Let me give you another quote. He's a philosopher called Dr. Loyal Rue. He also believes that life is meaningless and we have to create our meaning. But how do you overcome meaninglessness on atheism? His work, and he continues and he quotes, we must oppose a monstrous truth with a noble lie. Now, what is the monstrous truth? That life is meaningless. And the way we as atheists have to oppose the meaninglessness of life is to tell the what kind of lie? The noble lie. Pretend. Pretend as though life has meaning. Why have to you use that lie? We read. Because, and I quote him, because without such lies we cannot live. I hope you see when we compare the two stories, the story of Christianity and the story of atheism, how radically different they are in answering the meaning of life. And that you can enjoy purpose and meaning right now, and you can say, I don't lie to myself. It is actual reality that I can have meaning in life. There's another author. His name is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a political prisoner in Russia during communism. He stood up against communism, and this is what he said. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. So if we go to the next slide, I want to give you, as young people and also those who are older ones, I want to give you the opportunity to choose which story are you going to choose. Are you going to choose the story of meaning or the story of meaninglessness? Will you live by the lies or will you be courageous and not take part in the lie? Are you going to be courageous? Yes? Are you going to be courageous? The courageous person is the one who doesn't take part in the lie. The lie of what? The lie of pretending. Because in the Christian story, we don't lie. The Christian story says there is meaning because God exists. And the last point, and we're almost done. Here we have the 6 points that we've been studying together, and we come to the last point. Creating your own meaning is merely a distraction from life's meaninglessness. You say distraction? Yes, it is. I'm not the one who has figured this out. If we go to the next slide, Woody Allen, that I have already mentioned to you, remember the clip? The guy? What's the point of doing my homework? The universe is going to explode and expand. He understood the problem that his atheist friends had to solve. And this is how we've said it. This is my perspective and has always been my perspective on life. I have a very grim, pessimistic view of it. I always have, since I was a little boy. It hasn't gotten worse with age or anything. I do feel it's a grim, painful, nightmarish, meaningless experience. And that the only way that you can be, what is the word? Happy, is if you tell yourself some lies and deceive yourself. Do you see the difference between the two stories? I hope you do. But I am not the first person to say this, or even the most articulate person. Next. It was said by Nietzsche, it was said by Freud, it was said by Eugene O'Neill, one must have one's delusions to live. If you look at life too honestly and clearly, life becomes unbearable because it's a pretty grim enterprise, you will admit. And so Woody Allen is very clear. The more you discover the meaninglessness of life, the more distracted you have to be in order to continue to live. Why is it so? Because otherwise life is unbearable and you cannot handle the burden of life. You see, the atheist story tells us that the way to cope with meaninglessness, if we can jump, one more, there you go. The atheist secular story which teaches that God is dead and life is meaningless. So the way the atheistic story is going to give you, how should I say, coping mechanisms to deal with the meaninglessness of life, it is either going to tell you, you know what, let's despair. Let's just completely despair. Like, let's scream, 1, 2, 3, wah! That's what happens in school nowadays. Haven't you seen that? Life, despair. Why? Because life is absurd. Or become cynical and bitter. You remember? Life is ironic. Your husband died by cancer? Let's laugh about it. Right? It's crazy. But this is the different coping mechanisms on how to deal with the meaninglessness. Or live in denial of the self-evident. Life is to be pretended by the noble lie. You have to lie to yourself. You have to completely tell yourself, yes, life is meaningless, but I can create my meaning. You have to do that. Or you have to distract yourself from life's meaninglessness. How are you going to distract your life's meaninglessness? This is really fascinating. I find it so interesting. At the same time, in Europe, as atheism and secularism is growing stronger, and people feel there is a meaning crisis in society, as that is growing in society, you know what else is growing in society? Oh, I didn't put it in, sorry. The entertainment industry and substance abuse and addiction. There is a direct parallel of the entertainment industry and the substance abuse and addictions with the meaninglessness that people have. The meaning crisis that people are struggling with. And have you noticed it? The more north you come, the more lonely people are. At least the more south you go, even though people say life is meaningless, at least there is more fellowship. So you can understand how pretty dangerous our societal culture has become, because on top of the meaning crisis that people are struggling with, there is the loneliness epidemic, and people have to distract themselves. That's why you will have Netflix all over again. That's why you will have those smartphones and whatever, because we have to distract ourselves. We cannot think. Remember, we have to pretend. And the movies and the musics and the songs, they are just affirming to us, yes, we have to distract ourselves. Likewise with drugs, drug abuse and addiction. It is to push down the inner reality that life is meaningless and I have to do something about it, but I cannot bear the pain, so with the drugs, I'm going to put it down. You see? It's the story of atheism. It's the story of atheism. But you say, Sebastian, I'm an atheist and I feel worse now than ever before. What is your solution? Let me present to you my solution. If you go back, not forward, but back. Yes? Yes. So one more forward. There. If God exists, then life is meaningful, which means that you can discover the meaning of life. Let's go to the next slide. When Paul Colinthi, remember Paul that I mentioned to you? When Paul Colinthi describes what happens in his life when he meets death and tragedy, this is what he said. He found that the secular story offered him no comfort, no hope, and no purpose to hold on to when everything was crumbling. But he discovered the Christian story. And the Christian story changed everything for him. What did he discover? Next slide. He discovered that as he was reading the Bible, he came to the Gospel of John, and the very first verse, the very first sentence of the Gospel says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Now, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the Greek word that John was using for the word word is the word logos. You can see there. The logos can also be translated as meaning. Did you know that? So if you read the text again, and instead you don't read the word, but instead you read meaning with a capital M, the text is going to be wonderful. It says, in the beginning was the meaning, and the meaning was with God, and the meaning was God. And the meaning became flesh and dwelt among us. This is revolutionary. This means that the logos, the meaning behind everything, became a human so that our meaninglessness, we could find meaning. Jesus Christ is not just a teacher. He's not just a role model. Jesus is not just a wise man. He's the meaning of life itself. And John writes in a couple of verses later, if you can go to the next slide, John says, in the meaning was what? Life. And the life was the light of man. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. My friends, who is meaning? Jesus. You see, meaning is not just an abstract idea. In the Bible, meaning is a person. And that means that the meaning of life is connected to relationship. But not just with anybody else, with Jesus. You see, in Jesus, our questions, our struggles, they all meet. When we see Jesus as a human, we see a God who not only explains the meaning of life, he enters into the meaninglessness of humans' lives, into our pain, into our despair, into our death, and through his resurrection, even death cannot extinguish meaning because the Logos is eternal. You see, Paul Calinthi, he was struggling with the meaninglessness of life. He was suffering with death. His philosophy did not help him. How could it? But now he understood the Logos. He understood the meaning. And he realized that his life is not just a chapter in an absurd story, but it's part of a larger narrative that has both her purpose and hope. So in his final days, Paul wrote in his book that his faith in God gave him a new perspective. Even in the face of death, he could find meaning. Meaning with a capital M. And not because he had all the answers, but because he had encountered meaning himself. My question to you is, are you facing life's difficulty right now? Do you feel that you are going through darkness at the moment? Remember what the text says, and the light shines in the darkness. But what has the darkness not done to the light? It has not overcome it. Remember, the light shines in the darkness. And remember, the light can shine in your life if you are willing to open up yourself to it. So my question is, what will you choose today? You see, the Christian story offers something so much better than the atheistic story I have told you. The Christian story does not offer you to despair. The Christian story does not offer you to be ironic about life. The Christian story does not tell you to live in denial and to tell you noble lies. The Christian story does not tell you to distract yourself from life's meaninglessness. Instead, the answer is a person. The answer to all of our problems is Jesus Christ, who is the Logos, the meaning of everything. And when you find Him, you find not only a reason to live, but a reason to hope, even in the shadow of death. What will you choose? According to you, is there life before death? Yes, because there is reason to live, because Jesus has come and He can be your life. I was thinking that as we are going to end this part and before we sing, I would like to divide you 2 and 2 or 3 and 3 where you sit and discuss what you had learned today. We had a really big presentation. It was a rather philosophical one. But what is it that you bring yourself with? What is it that you are taking away from this evening? Because at the end of the day, you have to answer the question to yourself. Is there meaning in life? And if yes, why? So let's discuss that question wherever we're sitting. Maybe we can do that in 5 minutes, and then I will have a short prayer, and then we will